1863, Kansas had long been the center of strife and warfare over the mission of slave versus free states. In the summer of 1856, the first sacking of Lawrence sparked a guerrilla war in Kansas that lasted for months. John Brown might be the best-known participant, but numerous groups fought for each side in bleeding Kansas. By the beginning of the American Civil War, Lawrence, Kansas was already a target for pro-slavery ire, having been seen as the anti-slavery stronghold in the state and, more importantly, a staging area for Union and Jayhawker excursions into Missouri. Initially, the town and surrounding area were extremely vigilant and reacted strongly to any rumors that enemy forces might be advancing on the town. However, by the summer of 1863, as none of the threats had materialized, citizen fears had declined and defense preparations were relaxed. The attack was the product of careful planning. Quantrill had been able to gain the confidence of many of the leaders of independent bushwhacker groups and chose the day and time of the attack well in advance. Different groups of Missouri riders approached Lawrence from the east in several independent columns and converged with well-timed precision in the final miles before Lawrence during the pre-dawn hours of the chosen day. Many of the men had been riding for over 24 hours to make the rendezvous and had lashed themselves to their saddles to keep riding if they fell asleep. Between 300 and 400 riders arrived at the summit of Mount Orrid, then descended on Lawrence in a fury. Over 4 hours, the riders pillaged and set fire to the town and killed most of its male population. Quantrill's men burned to the ground a quarter of the buildings in Lawrence, including all but 2 businesses. They looted most of the banks and stores and killed between 185 and 200 men and boys. By 9 a.m., the raiders were on their way out of town, evading the few units that came in pursuit. The raid was less a battle than a mass execution. Due to the surprise, swiftness, and fury of the initial assault, the local militia was unable to assemble and mount a defense. Most of the victims of the raid were unarmed when gunned down. With revenge a principal motive, Quantrill's raiders entered Lawrence with lists of men to be killed and buildings to be burned. While many of the victims of the raid had been specifically targeted beforehand, executions were more indiscriminate among segments of the raiders, particularly Todd's band that operated in the western part of Lawrence. The men and boys riding with Bloody Bill Anderson also accounted for a disproportionate number of the Lawrence dead. The raid devolved into extreme brutality. The Lawrence Massacre was one of the bloodiest events in the whole history of Kansas. During the time of the Civil War, when communication was slow, a system of signals through lanterns being lit from house to house or from hills was put into place by settlers and citizens of different towns. One such route was a lantern from the branches of Signal Oak that telegraphed a code of signs across the Coal Creek Valley to Blue Mound, where they were flashed in turn to Mount Orrid at Lawrence and back again. Thus the settlers rallied when the ruffians came. This is what I have been told by my father from a very young age, that one such route started at Blackjack Battlefield to Signal Oak, to Signal Fire, to Blue Mound, and on to Mount Orrid of Lawrence as a warning system for Quantrill's raiders. The town of Blackjack was established in 1855 as a trail town on the Santa Fe Trail. This is where on June 2, 1856, John Brown and 29 others met Henry Pate and fought the Battle of Blackjack. This started after Brown's 2 sons were captured and held prisoner by Pate. This 5-hour battle went in Brown's favor, and Pate and 22 of his followers were captured and held for ransom. Brown agreed to release them as long as they released Brown's sons. This became one of many different locations that started signals to Mount Orrid. From Blackjack to Signal Oak, where a tree stood tall and firm, bending with extremes of the region's weather. This tree provided more than just shade for the residents, as the community of Baldwin City sprouted out of the Kansas prairie. Its branches signaled a warning to others. Through time, it was known as Baldwin City's beacon, a messenger. Signal Oak was more than just a tree. The hill that it stood atop of overlooks the valley and is one of the most painted, photographed, and viewed valleys in all of southern Douglas County. Mount Orrid, where Kansas University is located, is seen to the northwest. Blue Mound and Bald Mound are straight north. Signal Fire was then just north of Signal Oak and was a red 2-story brick farmhouse. This house is where my father grew up, but there is no written documentation of its history and has since been demolished in recent years. Blue Mound would have then been about 3 miles north of Signal Fire and 5 miles north of Signal Oak. Here many early trailblazers would happen upon Blue Mound, which is one of the early major landmarks of the Oregon and California-bound travelers, and because many westbound travelers hailed from the flatlands of the Midwest, Blue Mountain served as their first glimpse of mountainous terrain. Despite the trees and human development, this large hill is still visible for quite a distance. During the 1800s, when the land was still open prairie and the tree line was limited to the Wakarusa riverbank, it would have been invisible for many miles away. Mount Orrid is perhaps best known for being the staging area for William Quantrill's raid into Lawrence on August 21, 1863. Presently, the campus of the University of Kansas rests on Mount Orrid. So why didn't the system of warning work during Quantrill's raid? Perhaps it's because of the successful planning on his part, or countless other possibilities that we will never know.